not. To say they are Grecophobe is not quite fair, but let's say the Romans thought they were special and the Greeks were okay. So when we think about that, let's always bear in mind the Romans have to have their own special story. The Republic itself, which sometimes is confused with the Roman Empire, did have an empire of its own. So it's not really correct to say there's a separate Roman Republic and a Roman Empire, because the empire already existed while the Republic was still going on. The great question that we will be considering during the next few sessions is how a republic can continue to exist while holding an empire. But that will be the problem we will deal with as we start with this question of origins and Virgil's Aeneid. Well, the founder, supposedly, Aeneas, was, as we can imagine, not a mere human being. He was half God, half human. As you can see, his father was the human, because the mother didn't have a wrinkle on her. And of course, that's because she was Venus, the goddess of love. Yes, Venus and Anchises. Apparently, Aeneas was the product of a long weekend. And conveniently, Aeneas, who was married and the father of the little boy there, was in fact escaping from a burning Troy. You say, well, where was his wife? Conveniently, she was lost in the flames, so that you don't want traveling characters that are not essential to the plot. So just say she was lost, she was a real nice person, this, that, and the other. But she's out of the picture, and now we have, for a while, the father and son, along with our hero, escaping Troy. And what is he going to do? Well, of course, like the heroes of the Odyssey, he's going to sail and have many experiences on his journeys. And trouble is ahead. By the Queen of Carthage, Dido had just buried one husband, and that's real sad. And sometimes we talk about the stages of grief. Well, she said, enough, man, it's been fun, this whole love thing, but I'm just going to be into being single. Well, that's Aeneas' mother up there. You see her flying in? And she says to the kid, that's, of course, Cupid says, shoot her. Yeah. And boy, in the words of the old song, zing with the strings of her heart, she said, hello, sailor. Have you been to Carthage before? You know, that kind of thing. And you think, wow, I never dreamt. I mean, gosh, you know, he's sailing. He says, gosh, you know, I've really been being married, and now I'm going to be dating the Queen of Carthage. This is great. And she says, this is just wonderful. And so it all seems great. And you know, Carol, passage after passage of, they just in love, and says, let's have a secret wedding in the cave or something like that. So all of that, there's no Carthaginian marriage license, I can tell you that. But So you say, you mean it's illicit? Well, let's just say they've got a temporary pass. And so everything is going on swimmingly until one of the gods tells him, this has got to end. You've got a big job to do. And you got to get out of Carthage. So we know what happens. Honey, this has all been a lot of fun. I'll never forget you. This is very important. Have to see you again real soon. All of that, all of the above. And of course, she's not pleased with the result. So, of course, the Carthaginian-Roman situation is supposed to have been rooted in the spurned love of Aeneas. He said, I would love to stay with you if Mercury hadn't had this special visit. He told me I did. Yeah, right. You know, I mean, that's a little unbelievable. But anyway, of course, that's the end of poor Dido. So we have a big old fire and the end of Dido. And now we're off for more adventures. And these adventures, of course, will eventually bring him to Italy and marriage, legal, to the king of the Latins' daughter and only heir. We don't want another male in the story. So Lavinia is going to be his queen. And the story will go, you see, that from Aeneas and Lavinia will come the Roman descent. You say, well, how can all that work out? Oh, there's more. Believe you me, we've only gotten started. Because this was supposed to be way back in Trojan War times, remember? And now we've got to move the story forward to the descendants of Aeneas and Lavinia. And that means, of course, we've got to have more action. Rubens is the artist responsible for this work, and apparently the painters of the 17th and I guess 18th century, and I guess 16th, loved these themes of mythology. And in this case, one of Aeneas' descendants was a Vestal virgin. 6, I believe, young women chosen, not necessarily for lifetime commitments, but for lengthy terms of lighting the heart and maintaining the heart of the goddess Vesta. In any event, this poor soul, you see her there with the Vesta, the hearth, just minding her business, doing her work. And the god Mars comes along and apparently talks to her seductively and gets her mind off her work. And you can say, and I don't know that little fella there, if he's the love god or he's the god of behaving and doing your job. I'm not sure what he's there for. But whatever it is, obviously it didn't work. And she is going to be, shall we say, disgraced, because she will have this fling with Mars, the god of war, this poor Vestal virgin. Her fate will be buried alive because she will, she is impregnated, and of course, she will bear the 2 little boys. So it gets all very complicated. The Young and the Restless has nothing on this story, right? I mean, there are always all of the complications. You say, what's a wolf doing in our story? Well, twins need milk. And so apparently a kindly wolf found them because the twins were put on a raft on the river Tiber. And then The story has it the wolf felt bad and had some to spare, so provided these little boys, Romulus and Remus, with her milk. Now, the statue has an important story, and I'm going to say something that concerns our friends in the Peach State. In the 1920s, Il Duce, the Fuhrer, in an act of friendship to America, provided a copy of this to the people of Floyd County, Georgia. That's right. You can understand by the late 1930s, it was necessary to remove said statue from the courthouse. So that was put in the basement. Check it out in Rome. After the war, and we got all chummy with the Italians again, NATO, then out comes the wolf and the boys. And it's still there. We just don't mention Benito Mussolini. But we don't mention him anymore. We just say, a gift from the loving people of Italy. So, no more Il Duce. That's a true story. So your next trip to Rome, don't forget I told you, okay? Because it's right up there. But that happened. So anyway, they've been fed, so we're glad. Twins like milk. Okay, fine. So now what happens? Romulus and Remus, yes, are discovered by a kindly shepherd. Have you ever known one that wasn't? I mean, y'all hear the mean shepherd, harsh shepherd? No, kindly shepherd. Shepherds just tend to be really nice people. And so they're there, and he says, oh, look at the little boys. And the shepherd's wife said, this is great. Everything I've wanted, twins. Okay, so now they have a new home, and they learn the sheep business. And so they are all, excited, career goals and all of that. And then somehow they discover, I'm sure the gods sent some little message to them, said, you're really not meant to be in these sheep products. You're meant to be not sweaters, not lamb. It's to be kings. They said, oh gosh, Mom, Dad, this has been wonderful here, but we're moving on. So the idea is that Romulus and Remus went off to found a great city, and in a sort of another version of the Cain and Abel story, they just have a hard time working together. And so, given the name of Rome, it's not surprising that Remus is the loser. Romulus prevails, and he will then name his new city Rome. And he will be the king. Boy, he is just done up within an inch of his life, isn't he? He's just all fancy with all of his jewelry. And he is the legendary first king of Rome, of which there were 7. And don't you love that number 7? 7 hills, 7 kings. So we got the 7 kings, more about that later. But all of this is essentially the legend of Rome's founding, and we think Virgil's Aeneid and similar works for providing all these glorious details. Now, how about some truth, which is it's never got any gods, heroes. You just hate that, don't you? It's just a bunch of regular people. And you're thinking, wow, that's really brings you down. But I'm sorry, it's just a bunch of shepherds and farmers hanging out and basically forming a community in this particular area, as we know, of central Italy, some distance, not a lot, but some distance from the sea along the Po River. The term Latin, of course, which we so venerate, comes from the area in which Rome was created. And there were other communities there, but again, communities that, if you are from small places, you will understand most people have never heard of. They are just little spots on the road, shall we say, one-stoplight places that are not in the big picture significant. And it makes the whole success of Rome a very fascinating question about why this and not some other village. Well, they certainly had some great influences, like every archaeologist's dream place in the area around Florence and Siena. And I know, Lord knows, I know lots of these tourists here have been right there, so I don't need to tell you how wonderful it is. I remember going to Florence and thinking, I wish I could come back here many, many times. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. Tuscany, the word Tuscany, that area of Italy, comes from Etruria, the term for Etruscans. It is essentially in, well, we'll see a map in a moment, but it's in the northeast of Italy. And these Etruscans really got a bad write-up in the Roman histories of that day. Let's see some of the better words that could be used by Roman authors. Losers, scumbags, trash, yeah. You think, yeah, I know, doesn't it? It's just like in every way possible. And, you know, you're always thinking the protest mean maybe something else was there. And I've always believed that they don't want to acknowledge how important Etruscans are in their history. It would be wonderful if we could actually read the Etruscan language, because they were sophisticated, as far as we know, sophisticated urban people with high culture and cities. It's hard to determine what population, but it's certainly sure that, judging from ruins and excavations such as this in northeastern Italy, that not only did they have an interest in how people want to be represented after they are gone, because you'll notice, you say, well, those folks look right happy. Well, yeah, they are couples. See how they eat together? I mean, they're just there on the couch together, so it's real family time. And you think, well, I wonder who's doing all that work. Well, you bet it's not them, okay? These couples are, of course, of the affluent sort. And they are represented by the attitude of, you can take it with you. In other words, we got everything loaded up and we headed for the next world, but this is what they want people to remember them for. You know, the couples, and they are dining. And I imagine, and it's nothing simple about this. We're not just going to have lean cuisine and go to bed. I mean, this is meaning we are going to have a big meal and then maybe a little party. So, according to the Romans, these people may be promiscuous. Yes, they may be participating in orgies. We just don't know. It's just a shame that there are people like this. The truth, of course, is we have no reason to believe one way or the other. But there is certainly nothing in the Etruscan writings that they were, as a ruling class, any more or less inclined that way. Here they are, and like most folks see in the red area, and again, it's just like Auburn and Opelika over again. They're always at each other. You know which one's the best. I mean, you think, let it go. Let's live in peace and joy and love. No. So it's not like Etruria forever, go Big E. It's not like that. It's like they're all over each other. How do we know this? You guessed it, Plutarch, the source for all this kind of information. You say, well, how reliable? You know, you take what you can get. So these states fight with each other, and then at time, of course, they will attempt to expand. And where will they expand? Southward quite often. And that's where we're going to find our little farmer settlers in what will become Rome, as that territory will come under their authority. But again, during this period, and we're talking about pretty early on here, 7th through 6th or 5th centuries even. By the way, you might be interested to know one of our emperors that we'll talk about in the spring, Claudius, and some of you may have heard of him before. He had most unfortunate situation as to his stepson, but he was actually an expert in Etruscans. And by an expert, by the time of Claudius, you have, practically PhD granting institutions in Etruscology. And that's how it goes. It's hard to believe, isn't it? But it's true that by then they had been so long gone. That was for them like ancient history. So old Claudius would go up there and study the ruins and things like that, never dreaming, of course, that there would be family events that would necessitate him becoming emperor. So, yeah, Claudius was a scholar. Just thought I would mention that because I think the Romans were fascinated by these people. In any event, again, more sites of excavations and the sites, and you get this online and study this. It's absolutely fascinating, though, to see. And I gather where the work of these archaeologists, of course, never ends. We've talked about that with Bath and other places, because they'll keep on, as well as the industrialized world allows, but they will continue to study these Etruscan remains and continue to try to reach conclusions. But I think we get the picture of those individual wealthy cities that are militarily aggressive, warlike, but have, for the upper classes, a high standard of living, and who are communicating this through their lavish lifestyle, or should I even say death style, because they always represent themselves in these positions and lying down because, come on, we're on the couch, baby, and they're going to be serving the first course soon. So we are not doing anything ourselves. Why else do we have servants, right? So no do-it-yourself, not among these folks. But as always, we know these speak for all the people, not really, just themselves. And the rest of the people we know little or nothing about. But that to me is just the classic, if you've probably seen that in other books. Again, the the couple, Mr. and Mrs. Etruria, and they are there on the couch and living the good life. Merchants, military people, but generally speaking, affluent. And again, there seems to be something to the idea that the Romans really disliked them. And the vehemence with which that dislike is expressed has always made scholars suspect there was so much resentment. And could that be because of aspects of Roman history? Very possibly. How could they have influenced them? Well, we know the last kings of Rome, of the 7, were in fact Etruscans themselves. How the language would have worked, we just don't know. But we do know that even in terms of governmental structure that we'll be considering later, the Romans borrowed from Etruscans. And obviously, militarily, particularly, the Etruscan styles played a great role in the coming emergence of Rome as a military power. So made in Etruria is written all over Rome, a statement that would not go down well at a meeting of the Roman Republican Party, I can assure you, because as far as Romans were concerned, it was all because of the gods and their special qualities and that sort of thing. They would not say, yeah, we just really do thank you, Etruscans. You're mighty fine people. And no, there was never a sense of that. Interested in them, but hate them at the same time. So it's very, very interesting. I just thought of one thing that Plutarch taught, and I thought this was just the meanest thing. He said that Etrurian women prostituted themselves to earn their dowries. Now you think, I know, you think that's just really nasty. You know, you got to hit the streets to get your dowry. And you're thinking, I mean, that's just rude. And but that is the level to which these folks would stoop to tear down the Etruscans. And it's a very, very interesting idea. Language may be a form of Greek, but no one has ever been able to read it. So we're always thinking, will the scholar come along someday? Stay tuned. It hadn't happened yet. And people are still fascinated by the Etrurians, or Etruscans, even though we don't know the whole picture. Why did they die out? Who knows? Was it because they were taken over by the Romans? Again, big question mark. Oh, Carol, the language of Latin affects us every way, everywhere. It never ends, does it? See, a typical Latin person tells us, Magna Graecia. You say, but they could have put that in Greek. Or they could have, but they didn't. They put it in Latin, yes. And it's first declension, isn't it, Dr. Darren? Yes, it is. Don't worry, there won't be a quiz on this. And you won't have to do the pluperfect passive of the third conjugation. So you are being spared because you're an excellent class. So you're not going to get into any trouble. But we have heard about those Greeks and how they love to travel. And Magna Graecia is a perfect example. Because boy, do they love southern Italy and Sicily. And they were coming. You remember when we talked about Thucydides and the Peloponnesian War? Well, shoot, a lot of the major campaigns were down there. They really were. They just couldn't leave those folks alone. Colonists from the overpopulation of Greece had ended up here. They had founded their polis, like Syracuse, even Naples. And there they, and we don't know the details, but they aped the structures and customs of their homelands. I mean, there's an enormous Greek influence on Italy when you stop and think about it. But I just thought it was kind of interesting when you look down here in the boot, in the foot, and then in the sort of northern part of Sicily, and you see then when you go south, you see, what do you mean, those Carthage people are here? Yeah. And that's going to be heartbreaking too. Another story that we'll get to in another time. Right now, just be aware of them, that they are dangerous and threatening. But the Greeks, they are there in their various areas. And I might say when our Romans are just beginning to bud, the shepherds, you know, the kindly shepherds and the happy farmers there in their community. These Greeks have nice cities. They're merchants, traders. You say, wow, they seem a lot more sophisticated. Yeah, they're learning, and they're learning their language, you know, Alpha and Omega and all that, long before we had 5 declensions and 4 conjugations. I mean, you know, so, yeah, exactly. So let's just be fair about this. The Greek civilization was alive and well in southern Italy and Sicily. And I know many of you have probably cruised or sailed on the Mediterranean or done all kinds of exciting things. I often tell the young students, you know, if you're thinking about a honeymoon, don't go to Panama City. Think about, I mean, it's lovely. I don't condemn PC. It has some interesting experiences, and many of you have had some interesting experiences there in your youth. But I would think a cruise on the Mediterranean might be somewhat a little more memorable rather than the other. So they are major participants, as are Carthaginians and other Phoenician people in the Mediterranean trade. And so again, to contrast this and say the 8th or 7th or 6th centuries with the Romans is not fair. The Etruscans and the Greeks are so far superior. And this is just to emphasize the changing role of Rome, as it, of course, learns and then rules. But there are these great elements of influence. It's to note here only that the Greeks went a long way in their process of achieving their rule. This is a famous picture, and I think this might be, I suppose it's French, and I think it's probably French Revolution, and you might have seen this. I'm not sure, but I think you might have seen this at the Louvre if you've been there. I think I remember reading that. The story of Lucretia is a wonderful tale of Roman pride and Roman success. Rome had been under 7 kings. Number 1, of course, was Romulus. He was great. He was wonderful. He's George Washington, you know. We just love him to death. He's just so wonderful. And then the second, he's okay. He had some good points. And, you get some historical revisionism, kind of like John Adams. And then people can say, yeah, maybe we haven't said enough nice about him, too. But the idea is that these rulers seem to have gone downhill over the years. They got nastier, meaner every time. And by number 7, who was an Etruscan, surprise, it was really bad. He was just a psychopath. Mean, hateful, just the good people of Rome. And who do I mean by good people? Well, of course, I mean top people. But we're not saying that. We're just saying the good, civic-minded people of Rome thought, we just can't take this anymore. It came to a head because of Lucretia. Lucretia was a Roman woman through and through, married to a fine military figure, devoted to her home. And what did she like to do? Well, she liked to work with her loom and weaving and things of that sort. She had a variety of those activities. Oh, she was not idle. No, indeed. Unlike the women of certain places, starting with E, she had no interest in debauchery or sloth. She wasn't going to kick back or chill. Indeed not. The Roman woman of this sort was always busy, making a good home. Yeah, but you say, but I am a person of the upper class. I could do anything. All the more reason for you to work hard in the home. Well, according to the tale, the son of the Etruscan king came to her and, threatening to say that she slept with a slave, overcame her and raped her. And her response, after her husband, father, and other Romans were there, was to commit suicide, saying, I think if that were a better depiction, it would show you the knife. The idea being that no one through me will dishonor Roman women. And it is up to you, the men, to punish the person responsible. The individual you see here with the red is Brutus, who is an individual who was a friend of the family and a great Roman patriot. And he will now be, in a sense, aroused to say, we are sick of Etruscan oppression, and now we will arise to remove the Etruscans. The story then of Brutus and Lucretia, which is told in Livy in Roman histories, is a story of Roman patriotism. And the last monarch is expelled along with his family members, and they're all loathsome. It's not, you can say, well, some Etruscans were real nice, and he had cute kids, and his wife was a loving person, honey. I'm just glad you say. No. They were all sinister and wretched. Okay? In these stories, we never make exceptions, okay? So all of the Romans, they're good people, they're upright people, and they know these Etruscans. Oh, and in addition, all of the Etruscans are debauched. Like many people, they would call for earlier breaks and longer breaks. Unlike you, who's getting now a full 5 minutes off right now. Okay? Okay. Gee, I think some people made their escape. See, I should have guards posted at the various exits. Yeah. Okay, here we go. We talked before the class ended about Brutus, and Brutus is an example of the ruling class. Well, so is Lucretia and the whole gang. They're all part of the patricians. And as you can see from this statue of the patricians, they love that family. And we know people, we all know people who are, shall we say, obsessed with genealogy. And you can see, if you're carrying around your heads of your kinfolks, you're probably saying, well, this one was a cattle rustler and this one was a horse thief. No, no, no. These people, these patricians are saying, my ancestors were noble. They were, oh, what was that term I used to hear when I was a boy? They were high types. That is to say, they were blue bloods. Patricians, of course, I don't need to say. Pater, patris, need I go on with the declension? Yes. Having to do with fathers. Could women be patricians? Of course, but of course it's a very, very male-dominated world, so we call them patricians. Is it about their bank accounts? No. It's about their ancestry. You may have money, but you don't have the right people. So, you don't call, yes. You may have money, but you're not part of the elite. And they consider themselves elite. They intermarried. And no matter what sort of family you had in terms of wealth from trade or anything else, you weren't part of that group. And that, of course, will be one of the great stories of Rome's early centuries. Plebeians, and I thought nothing could illustrate the plebeian more than work, is not altogether fair. And I know there are some people who will appreciate the fact that when we teach something about the third estate, it's very hard to get it into people's noggins, 18-year-old noggins, that the third estate doesn't mean simply the poor, that the plebeians included all ranges of people in terms of income. But you can't date a patrician, you can't get in that way. You're thinking all the different ways. It's not it. You can't bribe them, at least not early on. It's the idea of that is a total division. The plebeians then include the masses, if I may use that term to refer to working people, largely peasants, obviously, farming. And then, of course, if we want to use the term middle class, merchants, export, import, whatever, and they are all limited socially and economically. This is a reality of the early centuries. And it's to be borne in mind because it has such an impact on early Roman history. But when we talk about that Lucretia and Brutus business, remember all of those folks are patricians. Unless it's someone maybe trying to clean up or straighten out or things like that. They are plebeians, you betcha. But all of the major actors in the story are all part of these patricians. And of course, it is legally discriminatory because it does affect your rights. It affects everything about your life. And I don't think any of us should be surprised if you work In the classical Greek history class, you know, we talked about the Greeks went through this very same thing. Every society seems to start out as society. It's always based on your blood. And who were these patricians early on? I suspect they were the heads of these tribes and their family members and so forth. I think it's like an evolution of societal structures, if you will. So the question is, how are the rich folks going to get on into the power? That's the way I always look at it. Folks with those big fat bank accounts. Because that hurts your feelings. Because I always tell the classes, I always think that's why this French Revolution, it's because those people in the third estate, they want to be noticed. They want to be big because they've got money. So we should be noticed because we've got money. But you've got to break through the patrician ranks. Ultimately, through what's called the War of the Orders, they worked out, and this is one of those theoretical charts. You know, when you're a kid and you study government in school, and the teacher says, now we have the executive, and then we have the judicial, and then we have the legislative. Exactly. And everybody's going, oh, yes. So, and then you have to grow up, and somebody says, oh, I don't think it works that way. Well, I'm sorry, but I tried to use this thinking that at least it will make something that is very complex a little bit more understandable. There are two consuls, and again, that's kind of like the Spartans had two kings. In the case of these executives, the consuls, they had only 1 year terms, so the idea is that they can't hold it too long. And there are two of them, and presumably one can veto the other. Now, you'll notice by the colors, it's kind of like, oh, well, how nice. We're sharing and being together, and we're so warm, we're so fuzzy. But understand this takes centuries to occur, and so it's to be understood that it didn't begin this way. The concessions of patricians to even allow intermarriage, that took some time. Because the patricians were, how you say, not polite. I would even say grudging. And, yeah, I know she has money, but her blood ain't that good. You know, that kind of thing. But, you know, generation 2, you'll get over it. And your children, the shame of being married to mother's a plebeian, and grandfather got his money in trade. You'll get over it. You'll deal with the pain. All of that means that at a certain point, probably, as you see, that's not until the 3rd century, you'll have a consul who is plebeian and a consul who's patrician. Again, that brings up lots of questions. Was the plebeian consul really going to serve the interests of the plebeians? And you had, well, you know, we would like to believe it was, but it's possible that he was a mere stooge. Yes, he'd been bought. And I know those of us in Alabama find that utterly incomprehensible that there could be any venality in their government. Yes. Are you shocked? Shocked, horrified. I'm sure in Illinois, the home of pure leaders. Yes, right. So, yes. So all of this is to say that when you go into the other branches of government, the senators, 300 of them, and we think of the Senate, of course, being dominated by the elites, and they were. But the patricians insisted that while they might have more the plebeians would have representatives there. The Senate, of course, was, remember the Areopagus, some of you, the sort of like the meeting of the city leaders. That was where the Senate had its origins in Rome. And the idea is that their word was final. And I'm coming back to the other group, but the citizen assemblies, again, comes in a variety of forms in Greece, because it comes in the form, you remember, of the lower house, all the males. But here in Rome, assemblies will be more or less representatives of soldiers, because soldiers were an elite group of their own, because not everyone could be a soldier, because you had to essentially pay for your own gear and the horse. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you, horse bills can be high. So if you're horse people, you understand this is not anything for people who say, well, you know, I'll just put that on account. No, you won't. Then you're not part of that group. So there will be assemblies for the various groups. And you say, well, what could they really do? Well, for a long time, they couldn't do much. Remember the Spartans and that lower house, and they could just go, Well, in this case, the patricians insisted that they have legitimate voices with power. And these are the individuals known as tribunes. And boy, these folks were powerful. There were 10 of them. They could shut down any action that Roman leaders were doing with a veto. And you talk about folks with power. And again, I hate to do this, but sometimes tribunes could be bought. Yes. It's horrifying. It just makes you want to gasp. But tribunes had lots of power, and the story of corruption, we shouldn't limit it to Rome or Illinois. Although both are stories of great examples of corruption. But we do know that tribunes, that is a very good position to be in. If you're considering whether to be a consul or a tribune, it would be a toss-up, because they both have great amounts of authority. The word demagogue somehow comes to mind, but the advantage of the tribunes is there are 10. So you figure that in some cases that a corrupt tribune could be brought to account by colleagues who understood he was doing very, very bad things, and he should be removed because he wasn't devoted to the Roman people. There are people like that. So, citizen assemblies then, they have their authority, but they entrust much of that authority to tribunes who can more or less veto an action by the Senate and the consuls, who can lead the civic religion, a term which is still used by the Pope today. And it is a term all of us Latin people just love. Pontifex Maximus. Exactly, the Pontifex Maximus. Drop that on your papal friends next time. So, yeah. Try that out in trivia, because, see, say, what do you call Francis when you all are hanging out? Pontifex Maximus. Because that is the high priest. That means that one of the consuls would lead the assembled Russian citizenry in their faith. such as it was. It was a civic faith, not a deeply personal spiritual one, but praying to Vesta or praying to the gods and make sure Rome stays number one. A religious pep rally, I guess you might say. I mean, it's, BEAT Carthage or whoever it was. So we understand clearly that the religion is of that sort. So, theoretically, after centuries, the Romans worked out a system. And what made it work, I think, is allowing upper plebeians to mix. I really do. Now, you would like to believe that the plebeians would be unified and loving and caring. Unfortunately, we know that's not true. That I imagine those upper third estate people just went right on about their business, intermarried, and said, well, we're of the very upper class. Not just because of our bank account, but look at my son-in-law. He's the Duke of such and such. You know how folks are. So much for just being rich, huh? Now we got the blue blood. Next generation, my genes mixing with his genes. There we go. Upper class. So, all of this means breaks in the plebeians. Like, who did you call a plebeian? Oh, I'm not. That may be somebody you got confused with. Yeah, maybe your grandfather, huh? So, obviously then, there is that change. Intermarriage is possible, office holding, and it's not like I think these mass of lower plebeians are going to say, yeah, great going, man. We're really proud of you that you've made it. And you're up in, yeah, that would be beautiful, but it's not true. I mean, it's like, I think it's everyone for themselves. And I'm assuming, however, that if you are socially mobile, economically able, that you are now able to realize your previous fantasies of being one of the social elites. And that is what we call the War of the Orders, the struggle of patricians and plebeians. And the plebeians knew how to bring about their will. Believe it or not, way back then, we don't think about labor history in terms of the Romans, but if you thought, suppose they had an invasion of Rome and the plebeians didn't come. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Oh, you mean we've got to have the war all by ourselves? I mean, yeah, I mean, that could be right. The plebeians would just say, well, y'all have a nice war, and we'll be over here in our part of the city. And so, in many ways, they could be troubling if they could not even negotiate some terms. I don't see them as like, remember the Spartan helots? And we're always worried they're going to get out of control. I don't think we see that so much with plebeians, because plebeians, strictly speaking, are free. But we do understand that plebeians want more or less rights, and they want to hold office, they want to intermarry. In other words, they want to have full Roman citizenship, and that is an extremely important change for this Roman Republic. Oh my gosh, this is in the Prado. If anybody's in Madrid, don't miss it. I looked him up, and you notice the date. You see that, 1804, and I'm thinking, boy, I bet those Spanish were not happy folks, because, you know, they were dealing with the little Corsican right then. You called him Napoleon. But I wondered if maybe the artist, and this is just my speculating, was looking for some kind of Spanish hero for the liberation from the French emperor. In any event, Cincinnatus, from which our great home of Procter and Gamble is named, and the Reds. This, of course, is one of the most famous incidents in Roman history, I suppose, and many an artist has depicted it as this Spanish one. And it has to do, of course, with Cincinnatus as dictator. And you say, oh no, a dictator? You mean a Benito Mussolini? Oh, no, no, no. He wouldn't get a nice painting like this if he had been. He is a devoted Roman. Devoted Roman. He had been consul. And what's he doing now? What many an Auburn person wants to do, agriculture. Absolutely. Yes. He just, give me that hoe, give me that pick. Oh, I just can't wait. The wide open fields. You say, but he is such a blue blood. How could he be? Why isn't he partying? Why isn't he going out and getting debauched? Because that's not what he is. He is 100% solid Roman. And when Rome is attacked, Roman leaders come to him on the farm. He says, this is me at the plow. And they say, Cincinnatus, could you stop the oxen for just a minute? And he says, gosh, I hate to have to slow down with my agricultural tasks. But, no John Deere back then, right? So, Rome's under attack. We need you to lead, he says. But my plowing. They said, well, it'll just be as long as we need you. He says, oh, shoot. Now remember, you are a Roman, sir. He said, okay, Bessie, y'all just stay right here. I'll be back. 6 months, he will lead Rome as dictator. Many a person filled with the joy of power would have said, and now I rule. Not Cincinnatus. I miss my farming. I mean, it's a beautiful agricultural saga, isn't it? It's like Cincinnatus, after 6 months as dictator, he says, now y'all, everything is settled. And my crops, I need to start getting them in. My animals miss me. I love my livestock. And all of that. The idea, though, of Cincinnatus as Roman patriot, and do I need to mention he's a patrician? Or did you think peasant? No. But that is the idea of Roman. And we've got lots of ideal folks running around here, don't we? And was he real? I suppose somewhat. I mean, there was a man named Cincinnatus who was dictator. But they do have that possibility of rule. You remember the Greeks had tyrants. So it is possible to have that in an emergency. But it's not meant to be permanent. And that, of course, is the problem that we run into in other societies, that there will be individuals who will, shall we say, not want to leave. But Cincinnatus will serve as the exemplar of Roman patriotism and, of course, the simplicity of life, because you know those old Roman movies and you see all these folks being carried around and all that. You don't see any of these folks like that, do you? They're hardy folk because they're not out all night with debauched activities. Indeed not. No, yeah, no, they are working and they are supervising plebeians, and all in all, though, they are participating, and I think that is part of this patriotic stereotype, if you want to call it that, or image at least, that we ought to bear in mind in terms of Republican patriotism. And of course, who could be a better example than that namesake for the great city in Ohio? Yeah. Pete Rose or whoever you want to remember in terms of Cincinnati. It just hit me when thinking about that. What about the law? Well, Rome, like many another society, and you can go back to the Mesopotamians on this. You know, if we didn't know about Hammurabi's law code, learned about it, I think, in Mesopotamia in the 19th century, we wouldn't have known about the written laws of the ancient Mesopotamians. So it can't be said that the Romans had the first written law code. No, indeed. However, we do know Roman law, and think here about France and Quebec and Louisiana and all of the other places, well, the papacy, the Catholic Church, who have an involvement, you might say, with the law codes and ideas of the Romans, will understand that at one time, law tends to be the stronghold of the patricians, because mos maiorum, the custom of the ancestors. What did Grandpa do? And say, well, have you got that written down? Well, no, we don't have any records, but we just know. That's called the oral tradition, or I said it's true, so you believe it. We would like to have that kind of authority over our children, I suspect. You know, it's what I know. It doesn't work, but I'm just saying, in the realm of dream, and they say, why do I have to do that? Well, because I had to do it when I was your age, and thus it is legal tradition. They say, oh, well, thanks for that explanation. I'll get busy with that since you say so. Again, a fantasy. What we know is that this could be far more than arbitrary, couldn't it? And obviously plebeians are not going to be happy about it, but what's a plebeian going to do? Well, you can strike, I suppose, you can protest, but the better thing is, wait until some of the upper plebeians have broken through the ranks and then assert that law should be written down. Note I did not say changed. I said written down, and there is a difference, because I'm going to show you some examples of these laws, because people always get this confused. Say, oh, liberal days are here to stay, and we'll have all these wonderful new regulations about fewer hours of hoeing and picking, and maybe days off or recreation activities for the kids. No, I don't think so. This is not part of the law of the 12 tables. If we want a significance of the law of the 12 tables, it's simply written language. Nothing more, nothing less. It is written, and therefore, if it's not written, then it's not the law. And this apparently is what makes it so important. You see 450 up there, that's pretty early. I mean, the Republic has been going. The foundation is supposed to be 753. That is the founding of Rome. Okay, 590, we're keeping score. 590 is the founding of the Republic. 450 is as important a date as I suppose in these early stages there could be for a society that is gradually evolving to be more inclusive, to have a more responsive government. And now, if you have the benefit of literacy, remember that, most folks can't read and write anyway. But at least you know it's written and you ask somebody to read it to you, I guess. You don't get any of that mos maiorum jazz, which, I mean, you know, folks would tell you, well, you know, that's just custom. Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting. Okay. Yeah, you know, I mean, yeah. So the writing is supposed to be good, but look at some of these laws. Okay. Oh, surprise, surprise. I know you didn't plan for anything like that. Number one, just make sure the women, yes. We don't want to have any. Vestal virgins, though, they can get out, sort of, but not really. But they have a distinguished role. They have a very distinguished role. I love that. A spendthrift is forbidden to exercise administration over his own goods. Yes, I think we can know about folks like that who need some help. Oh, I like the gathering fruit falling down on another's farm. Have you had that ever happen to you? You know, and you think, I grab it, it's mine, it's mine. You say, well, that seems so trivial, but take them to court. Judge Wapner, remember? You never know about how people can be somewhat ridiculous about those things. And this one just kills me. Song or composer, a song such as was causing slander or insult, clubbed to death. Yeah, I mean, that seems a little harsh. I mean, a week or two on the work farm, maybe, but I mean, people are really sensitive, you know. And then the dreadful, that is not surprising given what we know about Spartans, that they are not going to allow children with disabilities to survive. And while this is not as in Sparta, it is a decision of the family, the father, whether or not a child should survive. Now it's just written down. I mean, it's just overt and public that this is what is to be done, that such a child should have no legal right to live. All of this merely serves as examples and is to assure us once and for all that there is no way, shape, or form that we can speak of the 12 tables as bringing a new life of opportunity and liberalization to the mass of Romans. The 12 tables is merely to tell us that now Romans, if they have the advantage of literacy, can now determine what the law is and what the law is not. Now, as you know, this is merely the beginning of Roman legal development, because we know, in fact, that Roman law is one of the greatest contributions of the Romans to the future, the Roman legal system, to the Catholic Church, as well as to the legal systems of many of the great European states, other than, of course, Great Britain. But as far as that's concerned, we don't often think about that when we think about the development of Rome, because often we think instead of Rome's great empire. And of course, all of these developments tend to get overlooked when we get to that empire because, well, it's interesting, yes. It's interesting to see the Romans begin to dominate other people. But at the same time, it also tends to take away from us so much of the interest on these internal developments. And that's why I wanted to share with you the evolution of the patricians and plebeians, as well as the Roman law code. Next time, we will start talking about the empire of the Roman Republic and ask and try to answer that question: can a republic stay a republic if it has an empire? That will be the big question. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.